What if the greatest gift you could give someone wasn't advice, but your silence? Most people hear to reply, very few listen to understand. The deepest form of love is presence, and presence begins with listening. Listening, in its deepest essence, is far more than a physical act of sound entering the ears. It is an art, a discipline, and a practice that transcends limitations of language. When most people think of listening, they imagine simply paying attention to the words being spoken. But words are only the surface of communication, like ripples on a vast ocean. To listen truly is to descend beneath those ripples and sense the current moving in the depth. It requires presence, and presence is not merely about being in the same room as someone. It is about bringing the fullness of your awareness to the moment, free from the noise of distraction, free from the echo of your own inner dialogue. Think about how often we sit in conversations where our minds are not actually engaged in the act of listening. We are rehearsing our next response, forming judgments, analyzing what the other person means, or even wandering into unrelated thoughts. The body may appear still, the eyes may be directed at the speaker, but the mind is elsewhere. In this state, listening is fragmented, partial, and conditional. What is missed is the essence of the moment, the subtle tones, the emotional undercurrents, the unsaid truths that exist in the spaces between words. True listening asks us to put down the shield of self-importance and step into a state of quiet receptivity where the presence of another human being becomes more important than our own thoughts. When we practice listening as presence, we begin to recognize that communication is not simply about transferring information. It is about communion. To commune means to merge, to connect at a deeper level beyond language, to resonate with the spirit behind the sound. In this state, listening is not just hearing, it is feeling. You feel the energy behind someone's words, the sincerity of their intention, the vibration of their emotional truth. Presence turns listening into a sacred act. One, where we step beyond the mechanics of dialogue and into the realm of genuine connection. This kind of listening does not happen automatically. It requires a shift in consciousness. Most of us are accustomed to approaching conversations from the perspective of self. What do I think? What do I feel? How does this relate to me? But presence demands the suspension of self-centeredness. It is the willingness to dissolve the I in order to create space for you. This does not mean losing yourself, but instead expanding beyond the narrow confines of your own narrative so that another person's experience can fully exist in your awareness. It is almost as if you become a mirror, clear, open, without distortion, reflecting back the truth of what another is offering. Consider the times when someone has listened to you in this way. Maybe you can remember a moment when you felt completely seen and understood, not because the listener gave you the perfect response or solved your problem, but because they gave you their undivided presence. In those moments, you probably felt lighter, more open, maybe even healed, because you experienced the power of being truly received. That is the gift of listening as presence. It allows another to feel validated, honored, and accepted in their wholeness. It communicates something far deeper than words. You matter. I am with you. I hear you not just with my ears, but with my heart. Listening in this way also shifts the field of the conversation itself. Instead of being a transaction of ideas, it becomes a shared space of awareness. Presence brings with it a calmness, a stillness, and a subtle attunement that changes the quality of connection. It is almost as if silence itself becomes part of the dialogue. There are pauses, breaths, and quiet moments that carry as much meaning as the spoken sentences. When you listen with presence, silence is no longer empty. It is filled with attention, filled with care, filled with energy that tells the other person they are not alone. To cultivate this state of listening, one must begin with awareness of the present moment. It is a conscious choice to let go of the past that echoes in memory and the future that calls through worry or anticipation. It is to root yourself in the now, in the immediacy of the person before you, as if nothing else exists. This is where the practice of listening transforms into meditation. It is a discipline of returning again and again to presence whenever the mind wanders. Each time you notice yourself drifting into analysis, preparing your next reply, you return to the sound, the tone, the breath, the feeling of what is unfolding in front of you. Over time, this repeated return strengthens your capacity to remain grounded in presence. When listening becomes presence beyond words, it awakens a new level of sensitivity. You begin to notice the subtleties of communication, the tremor in someone's voice, the hesitation before they speak, the way their body shifts as they search for words. You begin to sense the emotions that ripple beneath the surface, sometimes even more powerfully than what is spoken aloud. It is in these subtleties that the true message often lies, and when you are attuned to them, you can respond not just to the content of someone's words, but to the depth of their experience. Presence in listening is also transformative for the listener. It invites you into a state of deep stillness where the ego's constant need to assert itself falls away. You begin to recognize that you do not need to prove, to argue, to dominate, or to impress. You can simply be, and in that being, you discover a spaciousness inside yourself that feels liberating. Listening becomes a practice of humility, of surrender, of stepping aside so that another can step forward. This is not weakness, it is strength. It takes great inner discipline to silence your own noise and create room for the truth of another. In essence, listening as presence beyond words is about becoming fully alive in the moment of connection. It is about honoring the sacredness of human interaction, where two beings meet not as separate entities competing to be heard, but as participants in a shared field of awareness. In this space, words are only a vehicle. The real message is carried in energy, in attention, in the silent understanding that flows between two hearts. And when you listen from this place, you step into the true art of listening. The art that transforms conversations into communion and presence into healing the mind is a restless instrument. It clings to thoughts, jumps from memory to imagination, and constantly seeks to interpret, judge, and categorize every moment. When someone is speaking to us, we may believe we are listening, yet in truth, most of the time we are filtering their words through the noise of our own inner dialogue. We hear fragments, we anticipate where the story will go, we craft our responses in advance, and we subtly impose our own narrative on top of theirs. In this way, the mind becomes full, and in its fullness, it leaves little room for the other person to truly enter. This is why silence within is so powerful. When the mind becomes quiet, it becomes spacious. Like an empty vessel waiting to be filled, it is within that silence that genuine listening begins. Silence is often misunderstood. To many, silence feels uncomfortable, awkward, or even threatening. People rush to fill it with words, thinking that silence means a lack of engagement. But silence in the mind is not absence. It is presence in its purest form. It is the act of suspending judgment, expectation, and self-centered thought, so that another person's reality can unfold without obstruction. A silent mind is like still water, reflecting what is in front of it without distortion. In this stillness, listening is elevated into something extraordinary. When you enter a conversation with a silent mind, you are not just receiving sound, you are opening yourself to the fullness of another's presence. This openness creates space, and space is one of the most profound gifts we can give. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone is speaking at once. There is no room to breathe, no clarity. Now imagine entering a vast open field where there is space for your voice to carry, space for your presence to expand. That is what a silent mind offers in a conversation. It gives the other person room to be, to express, to feel safe enough to reveal what lies beneath their surface. The silent mind does not mean the absence of thought altogether, for thoughts will arise. It means not clinging to them. It is the discipline of letting them pass like clouds drifting across the sky. You do not chase them, you do not resist them, you simply notice and return to the present moment. Each time you return, you carve out more space within yourself. You become less reactive, less consumed by your own stories, and more attuned to the subtle energies of the person in front of you. In this space, listening becomes deeper, richer, and more authentic. Consider the times you have spoken to someone who was clearly distracted, whose eyes darted elsewhere, whose mind was preoccupied. You may have felt as though your words were bouncing off walls instead of landing in an open space. Now think of the rare times when someone gave you their full, undivided attention. In their silence, you felt their presence. You felt seen, heard, and valued. That is the difference a silent mind creates. It transforms ordinary exchanges into meaningful encounters. The mind often resists silence because silence requires surrender. It requires relinquishing control, letting go of the need to dominate the conversation or to prove oneself right. The ego thrives on noise, for in noise it feels secure. But when we practice quieting the mind, we weaken the ego's grip and strengthen our capacity for presence. Silence, then, becomes not just the absence of thought, but the presence of awareness. It becomes a sacred container in which the essence of another person can be held with reverence. The silent mind also reveals that listening is not just an act of the ears, but of the whole being. In silence, the heart becomes attuned. You begin to sense emotions not just through words, but through the pauses, the breath, the subtle inflections. You notice the hesitations, the tremors, the moments where someone struggles to articulate what they truly feel. These are the hidden places where meaning resides, and they can only be perceived when the mind is quiet enough to listen beyond language. In cultivating a silent mind, we also become aware of our own inner landscape. Often, when we quiet ourselves to listen to another, we discover the noise within us, the restless thoughts, the judgments, the impatience. This awareness is not a failure, but an opportunity. Each time we catch ourselves drifting, we can return to presence, to breathe, to stillness. Over time, this practice builds resilience and depth. Listening becomes less about effort and more about being. Silence becomes the natural ground from which presence flows. The silent mind is a gift not only to others but to ourselves. When we quiet the endless commentary inside, we experience peace. We discover that in stillness there is clarity, and in clarity there is freedom. We no longer need to fill every gap with sound, with explanation, or with justification. We learn to trust the power of space, to trust that what is unsaid can be just as powerful as what is spoken. In this way, silence transforms from something empty into something alive, fertile, and healing. When listening arises from a silent mind, it shifts the very quality of relationships. Conversations become less about competing to be heard and more about co-creating understanding. Silence allows empathy to emerge naturally, because in the absence of mental clutter, we can truly feel another's experience. We can sense their joy, their pain, their longing, without overlaying it with our own agenda. In this shared silence, we create connection that is authentic, deep, and transformative. The silent mind creates space, and in that space, listening blossoms. It blossoms into presence, into compassion, into the kind of connection that nourishes both the speaker and the listener. It is not passive, it is not withdrawal, but an active, conscious choice to make room for the truth of another human being. In silence, we do not diminish communication. We expand it, we deepen it, we elevate it to its highest form. And it is in this quiet spaciousness that the art of listening truly begins to reveal its power. Every human interaction carries with it an invisible current of energy. Words are only one part of communication. Beneath them lies a field of emotion, intention, and vibration that cannot be captured by language alone. When we listen only to the literal meaning of words, we engage on the surface. But when we attune ourselves to the energy behind those words, we enter into a deeper dimension of listening, one that transcends language and connects us to the essence of the other person's being. This is where Listening becomes an exchange not of information but of energy. Think of a time when someone spoke with enthusiasm, their words flowing quickly, their body animated, their tone alive with passion. Even if you did not fully understand the content of what they were saying, you likely felt their energy. Their excitement may have stirred something in you, awakened inspiration, or sparked curiosity. On the other hand, recall a moment when someone spoke in monotone, their body withdrawn, their words heavy with sadness or fatigue. You did not need to be told explicitly what they were feeling, you felt it. This is the energetic layer of communication, and listening at this level requires presence beyond the intellect. It requires attunement to the unspoken signals that flow beneath the surface. When we listen as energy exchange, we begin to sense that every conversation is not just about what is said, but about what is transmitted. A person may say, "I'm fine," but the energy of their voice, the heaviness in their breath, or the subtle shift in their posture may reveal something entirely different. If we listen only with the ears, we take the words at face value, but if we listen with our whole being, we feel the incongruence, the subtle truth that words may conceal. This deeper listening allows us to connect with the unspoken reality of another person's experience. Energy exchange is reciprocal. It is not just about what you receive, but also what you offer. When you listen with openness, without judgment, you emit an energy of acceptance. You create a safe field in which the other person feels comfortable to reveal themselves more authentically. Your silence becomes supportive, your attention becomes grounding, your presence becomes a mirror in which they see themselves more clearly. In this way, listening is not passive, it is an active participation in the energetic flow between two beings. This exchange can be nourishing or draining, expansive or contracting, depending on the quality of your listening. If you listen distractedly, half-present, the other person feels it. The energy you offer is fragmented, and the field between you is weak. But when you listen with full attention, with your body relaxed, your mind quiet, your heart open, you create a resonance that amplifies connection. You are not just hearing, you are co-regulating, aligning, and harmonizing with the frequency of the other person. This is why someone who feels anxious may calm down when they are listened to deeply, or why someone who feels hopeless may regain a spark of hope simply because they were met with attentive presence. Energy exchange through listening also reveals the power of empathy. To empathize is to enter into another's field, to allow their energy to be felt within your own awareness without losing yourself in it. It is a delicate balance. Too much identification can overwhelm, too little leaves you detached. But when you listen as an energetic exchange, you begin to cultivate the ability to hold another's emotion, to feel it, acknowledge it, and reflect it back without being consumed. In doing so, you communicate to them, not through words, but through presence. I feel you. I understand you. You are not alone. This kind of listening is transformative because it speaks to the deeper layers of human need. Beneath the desire to be heard intellectually lies the longing to be felt energetically. People crave resonance, to know that their inner world can be mirrored in another's awareness. When this happens, healing occurs, a burden feels lighter, an isolation dissolves, a connection is forged that transcends the limitations of language. In this way, listening as energy exchange becomes a form of medicine. Soft, subtle, but profoundly powerful. The exchange is not one-directional. As you listen deeply, you also receive. You become aware of the textures of human emotion, the nuances of another's experience, the vibrations that reveal the interconnectedness of all beings. This awareness expands your own consciousness. You realize that listening is not just about understanding others, but also about tuning yourself into the greater symphony of life. Each interaction becomes an opportunity to attune, to harmonize, to grow in sensitivity and awareness. Listening at the energetic level also awakens intuition. When the mind is quiet and presence is strong, you begin to sense things beyond what is spoken. You feel the hesitation in someone's words, the yearning behind their stories, the unexpressed truth they may not yet have the courage to voice. This intuitive listening allows you to respond not only to what is said, but to what is needed. Sometimes the most profound response is not advice or solutions, but simply holding space, offering silence, or reflecting back the emotion you sense. In these moments, your presence becomes the response. When two people engage in listening as energy exchange, something greater than both of them emerges. The conversation becomes a co-created field where both participants are transformed. One is transformed by being seen and felt. The other is transformed by the deepening of awareness and sensitivity. This shared field has the power to dissolve barriers, heal misunderstandings, and create bonds that are more authentic and enduring than those built on words alone. Ultimately, to listen as energy exchange is to honor the truth that we are not separate. We are fields of energy interacting, influencing, and resonating with one another in every moment. Words may carry meaning, but it is the energy beneath them that carries truth. When we listen with presence, openness, and sensitivity, we step into this deeper truth. We begin to experience communication not as a transfer of information, but as a communion of energy, where the boundaries between speaker and listener dissolve, and what remains is connection at its purest level. At the heart of every human being is a longing to be acknowledged, to be understood, and to be valued. This longing is not merely about wanting attention. It is about the deep need to feel seen for who we truly are. When we speak, we are not just sharing information, we are offering pieces of our inner world. And when those pieces are received with care and presence, something profound happens. We feel a release, a softening, a healing. The simple act of being heard has the power to restore wholeness to a fragmented spirit. So often, people carry unspoken burdens. They move through their days with emotions tucked beneath the surface. Grief, fear, uncertainty, loneliness. These inner weights are rarely expressed fully because the world moves too fast. Conversations are rushed, and most listeners are more interested in responding than in receiving. When someone finally listens without interruption, without judgment, without the urge to fix or advise, those hidden emotions find a safe space to emerge. In that space, healing begins. It is not healing through solutions or strategies, but healing through presence. The act of being heard communicates in a language deeper than words that one's existence matters. When we listen with genuine attention, we are offering a kind of mirror. This mirror does not distort, does not impose, does not reflect back its own agenda. Instead, it reflects the speaker's truth as it is. To be held in such a mirror is rare and powerful. It allows people to see themselves more clearly, to hear their own thoughts in a new way, to recognize emotions that may have been buried or misunderstood. In this way, the listener becomes a catalyst for self-discovery, not by doing or saying anything extraordinary, but simply by holding the space of deep listening. The healing power of being heard also lies in the way it validates human experience. Many of the wounds people carry come from being dismissed, ignored, or silenced in moments of vulnerability. A child who was told to stop crying, a teenager whose struggles were minimized, an adult whose pain was brushed aside. These moments leave imprints. They teach us, often unconsciously, that our feelings are not worthy of expression. Over time, we internalize these messages and begin to silence ourselves. But when someone listens with openness and compassion, those old imprints begin to loosen. The listener's presence says, "Your voice matters. Your truth has value." This validation can be profoundly restorative, undoing years of inner suppression. Being heard also nurtures trust. When we realize that another person is truly listening, we feel safe. This safety is not intellectual. It is felt in the body, in the nervous system. Breath deepens, the shoulders relax, the guardedness softens. Safety creates the conditions for vulnerability, and vulnerability is the gateway to healing. In the presence of a good listener, people often find themselves saying things they did not even know they needed to say. The words arise, the emotions flow, because the environment feels non-threatening. This is why listening is not passive. It is active participation in creating a healing field where authenticity can emerge. There is also a profound difference between hearing words and listening to the soul behind them. Someone may share a story, but what they are really offering is their emotional landscape. To listen well is to tune into this deeper dimension. It is to notice the trembling in the voice, the pauses between sentences, the subtle shift in tone that signals something unspoken. These small details are windows into the inner world when we acknowledge them, sometimes not even with words, but with presence alone. We communicate that we are attuned not just to the story, but to the person. This level of listening is deeply healing because it says, I am with you fully. I see beyond the surface. I honor what you are carrying. Healing through being heard does not require answers. In fact, the impulse to offer solutions often interrupts the process. People do not always need fixing, they need witnessing. They need to know that their feelings, however complex or messy, can exist without being corrected. A listener who resists the urge to fix creates the conditions for self-healing. In this space, the speaker often discovers their own clarity. By hearing themselves in the presence of another, they uncover insights, resolutions, and truths that were already within them, waiting to be voiced. The listener becomes a facilitator of this inner unfolding simply by staying present. The act of being heard also has a physiological impact. When someone feels listened to, the body shifts from states of stress and defense into states of calm and safety. The heart rate steadies, the nervous system relaxes, and the brain begins to generate feelings of connection and trust. These biological shifts reinforce the emotional experience of healing. This is why conversations where we feel deeply heard often leave us feeling lighter, clearer, even energized. The body itself responds to the presence of authentic listening. The healing power of being heard extends beyond the individual to relationships and communities. Misunderstandings, conflicts, and divisions often persist not because of irreconcilable differences, but because people do not feel heard when listening is absent. Walls are built. When listening is present, those walls begin to crumble. To listen well is to build bridges, to create pathways of understanding where before there was separation. This does not mean agreement on everything, but it means honoring the humanity in another, and in that honoring, healing flows not just to the individual, but to the connection itself. Ultimately, being heard is a form of love. It is love expressed not through grand gestures, but through presence, patience, and attention. It is love that says, I value your being enough to set aside my own noise and enter into your world. For many, this experience is rare, and because it is rare, it is precious. It becomes a moment remembered, a moment cherished, a moment that leaves an imprint of healing. When someone listens in this way, they are offering more than attention. They are offering medicine for the soul. And in that offering, lives are changed, hearts are mended, and the silent wounds of invisibility begin to dissolve. Listening is not only about connecting with others. It is also a doorway to deeper self-awareness and personal evolution. When practiced with presence and openness, the art of listening has the power to reshape the way we experience ourselves and the world. It takes us beyond surface-level interaction and leads us into transformation of relationships, of understanding, and of consciousness itself. Most people think of listening as something we do externally, directed toward others. Yet the truth is that every time we listen to another with depth, we also begin to cultivate the ability to listen inwardly. External listening trains us in patience, in silence, and in receptivity. These same qualities, when directed inward, open the gateway to hearing the subtle voice of intuition, the quiet wisdom of the heart, the truths we often ignore beneath the noise of thought. Listening, then, becomes not just a social act, but a spiritual discipline, a practice that refines our awareness and awakens us to who we really are. Transformation through listening begins with the recognition that communication is not simply about exchanging information, but about creating connection. Each time we listen fully to someone, we are transformed because we step outside of ourselves. We loosen the grip of our ego, the endless need to assert, to prove, to dominate, and instead create space for another's experience to exist within us. This act of spaciousness expands our capacity for empathy, compassion, and understanding. Over time, this practice shifts us at a fundamental level. We become less reactive, less defensive, more open, more attuned. Listening shapes us into beings who are not merely existing in the world but engaging with it consciously. In this way, listening dissolves barriers. Many conflicts, both personal and global, persist because people are not truly hearing one another. Behind every argument is a longing, the longing to be understood. When someone feels unheard, they repeat themselves, they grow louder, or they retreat into silence and resentment. But when listening is genuine, the tension begins to soften. The speaker feels validated, the listener gains clarity, and the relationship evolves. Transformation occurs not through agreement but through presence. Simply being heard can change the dynamic of an entire relationship, and when relationships shift, so too does the larger web of our collective human experience. Listening also transforms our inner world. When we learn to listen deeply to others, we cultivate the same openness toward ourselves. Many of us move through life disconnected from our inner voice, drowned out by the constant chatter of the mind or the expectations of the external world. But when we sit in silence, when we turn the art of listening inward, we begin to notice subtler truths that rise within. We hear the whisper of intuition guiding us toward choices aligned with our authentic self. We recognize the patterns of thought that keep us bound to old stories. We uncover emotions we have long suppressed. This inner listening is a form of self-discovery, and with self-discovery comes transformation. There is a power in listening inwardly to the body as well. The body speaks in sensations, in tension, in the rhythm of breath. It tells us when we are at ease and when we are carrying unacknowledged stress. To listen to the body is to recognize its wisdom, to understand its signals before they become illness or fatigue. Just as listening to others creates healing in relationships, listening to ourselves creates healing within. It aligns us with balance, with clarity, and with vitality. Transformation through listening also awakens us to the interconnectedness of all life. When we listen deeply, we realize that we are not separate. Each voice we hear is part of a larger chorus, each story connected to countless others. This realization softens the illusion of division and awakens compassion. We begin to recognize that beneath differences in language, culture, or belief, there is a shared humanity, a shared longing to be understood and accepted. Listening reveals this truth not as an intellectual idea, but as a felt experience. And once it is felt, it changes the way we move through the world. There is also a creative power in listening. Every great idea, every breakthrough, every act of inspiration is born from the ability to listen to silence, to listen to imagination, to listen to the subtle stirrings of possibility within. Those who cultivate listening as a way of being are able to tap into realms of creativity that others miss because they are too consumed with noise. Listening opens the channel for something greater than the self to flow through, whether it takes the form of art, innovation, or wisdom. In this way, listening becomes a gateway to not only personal transformation, but collective evolution. Listening as transformation is not always easy. It requires vulnerability. To listen deeply means allowing ourselves to be touched, to be moved, to be changed by what we hear. It means letting go of certainty and entering into the unknown with another person or with ourselves. Yet it is precisely this vulnerability that opens the door to growth. Transformation never happens in the rigid boundaries of comfort. It happens in the openness of surrender. Listening asks us to surrender our defenses, our judgments, our constant need to be right, and in that surrender we discover expansion. When practiced consistently, listening reshapes not only individual lives but entire communities. Imagine a world where people listened with presence instead of distraction, with openness instead of judgment, with compassion instead of defensiveness. Conflicts would diminish. Relationships would deepen, and the collective consciousness of humanity would rise. Listening is not just a skill, it is a path. It is a path that leads us out of isolation and into connection, out of ego and into empathy, out of fragmentation and into wholeness. It transforms not by force but by the gentle power of presence, and as we walk this path, we discover that to listen deeply is to participate in the unfolding of a more conscious and compassionate world. The art of listening is more than a skill to be practiced. It is a way of being, a pathway to deeper connection, healing, and transformation. To listen is to step beyond the surface of words and enter into the essence of another's experience. It is to quiet the restless mind, to open the heart, and to allow presence to become the bridge between souls. In listening as presence beyond words, we dissolve distraction and touch the unspoken truth beneath language. In listening through silence, we create space where another can unfold freely. In listening as energy exchange, we attune ourselves to the vibrations of emotion and intention, aligning with the field of connection that exists between all beings. In listening with compassion, we offer healing, for being heard restores dignity, validates worth, and softens the wounds of invisibility. And in listening as a pathway to transformation, we discover not only the power to change relationships, but also the capacity to awaken within ourselves a higher consciousness. Listening is not passive. It is an act of love, an act of courage, and an act of creation. It requires presence, humility, and the willingness to step aside from the constant noise of self so that something greater can emerge. When we listen deeply, we do not just hear, we connect, heal, and we transform. We create the conditions for understanding to flourish and for compassion to rise. And in doing so, we elevate not only our relationships, but the collective experience of humanity itself. The art of listening reminds us that every voice matters, every story carries weight, and every moment of true presence has the potential to change a life. It is in listening that we find the threads that bind us together, weaving connection where there was separation, understanding where there was conflict, and healing where there was silence. To listen deeply is to honor the essence of another, and in that honoring, we awaken to the fullness of who we are meant to be.